Most musicians think they already practice effectively, but they're usually wrong. When I dig into what my students are actually doing versus what they think they're doing, the gap is almost always huge. So in this video, I'm going to show you the 3 key practice fundamentals that most players are missing, and 2 specific techniques to layer on top so your practice time starts producing real results. And none of this is theory. I'm working directly with 15 real people right now. I've had them make these exact changes and they're improving much faster as a result. Here's what 2 of them said. What I'd been practicing yesterday was easy. It shocked me. And more happy than the last 5 years of my life just doing this little stuff. Just be warned, some of this might sound almost too simple. But the important question isn't whether it sounds obvious. It's whether you're actually doing it. Because my students all said they were practicing effectively when we started. But it turned out every single one of them wasn't. Let's dive in with the 3 key practice fundamentals. You need these in place for every single practice session. Fundamental number 1 is clarity. This means knowing exactly what you're doing and why. If you're not clear on what you're aiming to do, then your practice will be purposeless. And if you're aimed at the wrong result, then it doesn't matter how good everything else is. Clarity means 2 things. The first is, how will you practice? Are you in what I call inventor mode, where you're tinkering around with lots of possible ways of doing things and learning which approaches work best? Or are you in what I call craftsman mode? And that's where you've already found a good approach through experimenting in inventor mode, and now you're locking it in with lots of perfect repetitions. The second is, what will you practice? You need this decided before you start, planned down to the level where you can just begin without ever having to think about what's next or even make any decisions about small details. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to take ages writing out long lists. It could be as short as D, HM for 3, O2, leg 2M, and that might translate to you as play the D harmonic minor scale starting from the 3rd, a range of 2 octaves, focus on making things as legato as possible and do it for 2 minutes. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else, it doesn't even have to make sense to you a month from now, and it doesn't have to be an exercise. Your what could be fixing a specific problem in a piece you're working on, or adding in an important facet of the music like dynamics or telling a story or something like that, or anything else really, but get clear on what you're trying to achieve and on what success looks like. Otherwise, you've limited your potential progress before you've even started. Fundamental number 2 is intense focus. Time spent practicing only counts in the sense of actually laying down new brain pathways when you're paying attention. So if you're not practicing with focus, then you might as well not bother. A single short practice session where you concentrate intensely is going to be hours and hours spent on autopilot, even if you're playing everything correctly. Now, the good news is that the clarity work we just covered helps with this automatically. When you've set clear goals, the mind doesn't have to wonder about what to do or what's coming next. It already knows. But at the end of the day, you've got simply to resolve to bring serious levels of concentration when you practice. Now, most of that's on you, but there are 2 actions you want to use to help you. Actively monitor your concentration levels and take breaks before you feel you've lost focus. Fundamental number 3 is your zoom level. You need to be ruthless on restricting your practice to the specific areas that need work and avoiding the temptation to drift onto other bits. You should already have decided what the key areas are. That's part of the clarity step. But now you're deliberately zooming in on them down to the smallest level possible. Literally ask yourself, what is the minimum I can do to target the exact bit that needs work? And then look at the start and the end of whatever section you've chosen and ask again, what if I cut this bit out? You'll be surprised how often you can go much tighter than you think. And the pitfall to avoid here is that you start out tightly focused, but then lose it as the session goes on. Before you know it, you're back to playing overly long sections again. And a particular trap here is that it often is a good idea to quickly check how the tiny problem spot fits in the context of a few bars either side. And that's fine, but make sure that you do zoom back in again once this is done, rather than getting stuck in that new, unfocused, long section. Now, once you've got those 3 foundational concepts in place, we need to talk about how you're going to work on things. And there are 2 very different tools you want to have in your arsenal here. There's always going to be some level of judgment required, but broadly, you'll want to use the first tool when you're working in inventor mode, because it's great for building new skills and extending existing skills further. And then when you're working in craftsman mode, you'll mostly want to use the second tool, because that one is great for bedding in existing abilities more firmly and making sure they're solid under pressure. Tool number 1 is deliberate practice. Now, whole books have been written about this, so here are just the key points, but you can go a long way with this. The basic idea of deliberate practice is that you actively choose to go outside your comfort zone, focusing on improving only one single thing at a time, and with clear objectives and definite feedback. And here's a repeatable structure that you can use to make sure you're practicing in a deliberate way. First, define a clear goal, zoom in on just one specific thing. And then step 2, do the practice itself. Step 3, evaluate results. Did you achieve what you set out to do? Step 4, make any necessary adjustments for the next repetition. And then step 5, you just repeat the process from step 1 again, including any of those improvements from step 4. A slightly simpler way I like to remember this is what I call the learning loop. So just plan, do, reflect. And one very important point to note here, in order to evaluate these results effectively, you need concrete feedback. And the clearest way to get this is to set a precise goal in the first place. A vague goal gives you nothing to measure against. Tool number 2 is the testing effect. And the crucial insight here is that familiarity is not the same as mastery. So once you've crossed over into craftsman mode, then you're not helping by just doing a lot of easy repetitions. To make things more solid, you need to introduce some element of struggle. And testing yourself is the strategy that has been shown to drive long-term progress here. This is much more effective than simply reviewing stuff, and some studies suggest it's more than twice as effective. But what exactly does it mean to test yourself? Well, once you can already do something, stop repeating it over and over. That just leads to familiarity and a false sense of security. Instead, leave it for a while, and then come back to it later and see how well you can reproduce it cold. This act of leaving time to forget and then checking how solid something is after a break, that's what we mean by a test. And this isn't just about getting a more realistic measurement of how well you've learned it. In fact, the very act of struggling to recall this ability from long-term memory rather than short-term, that's what will drive it deeper. So this testing approach is actually flat out the best way to improve something that you're already able to do. And how long do you leave between these tests? Well, the deeper it's gone already, the bigger the gap you should leave. And ideally, you're picking a gap where you can do it, but only if you're applying 100% of your concentration. Now, possibly the hardest part here is being willing to let go of measuring progress by how well you're playing at the end of a practice session. The only thing that matters is how well you progress over the coming days and even weeks, because when you apply these testing effect ideas, that will mean that you make much less progress on the day itself than with other approaches where you just repeat a lot and repeat and repeat. But if you have the courage to stick with it, then you will go much faster overall, because the approaches that deliver gains and feel really effective on the day itself are precisely the ones that leave you feeling frustrated in the long term, because you come back tomorrow and all that progress has just evaporated overnight. Now, if you're already familiar with spaced repetition or interleaved practice, this is exactly what they're about. They're structured ways of applying the basic idea from the testing effect. And so, worth exploring them if you want to go deeper. But when you're making great strides in your practice with all this stuff, then you still need to be able to deliver the goods in performance. So watch this video next, where I show you how to play your best every time, even when the pressure's on.